Blood Death Knights harness the use of life energy to heal themselves and protect their allies. They're one of my favourite tanks, and this video today for the War Within Season 1 is going to be very, very beginner friendly, while also giving veterans enough detail to hit the ground running. Let's start off by looking at the stat priority. It's going to be no shock to anyone, of course, that our primary stat is strength as a Death Knight in the War Within. Now, we want to just aim for a higher and higher eye level or item level to get more strength and, of course, get higher secondary stats. This here is the secondary stat priority. However, I wouldn't worry too much about that, especially if you are a beginner. If you are a veteran, you probably already know that you should be simming your stat priorities to find the better option. But really, that's only if you're comparing the two items of the same eye level. Getting a higher and higher eye level of gear is always going to be an upgrade. Looking at the secondary stats then, versatility increases our damage done, it increases our healing done, and it's also going to reduce our damage taken as well. We have crit, which is going to increase our parry chance, so we're dodging attacks, and also obviously a chance to do more damage and healing. Mastery, as Blood Death Knights, is actually Blood Shield. Each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, that's an ability that heals us, you gain 32% of the amount healed as physical damage absorption shield. And it's also going to increase our attack power. So basically, when we use our Death Strike to heal ourselves, we're also going to gain a percentage of that healing as an absorption shield, and we're going to do more damage for the more mastery we have. Haste is an interesting one. It's going to actually increase how fast we attack and also our rune regeneration. Runes, as you can see here, are a resource that we use as a Death Knight. Dodge and parry then gives you a chance to dodge and obviously parry attacks that are incoming. Quickly looking at our set bonus. Again, if you don't know what any of this means, don't worry. I'll be explaining it in full in the rotation. While you have one or more bone shield charges, the damage you take is reduced, and losing a bone shield charge has a chance to reduce the damage you take by an additional amount. The 4 set bonus of our gear in Season 1, your damage is increased by 1% per active bone shield charge. Taking damage while below but 6 bone shield charges has a chance to regenerate more bone shield charges. So just to go over that for anyone who doesn't know, you can see here I have a spell called Marrow Rend. Smash the target, dealing damage and generating 3 charges of Bone Shield. What does Bone Shield actually do then? It surrounds you with a barrier of whirling bones, increasing your armor, and each melee attack against you is actually then going to consume a charge. So obviously we want to keep this up as much as we can, and that is primarily what our set bonus is revolving around in Season 1 of the War Within. Again, more on that shortly. So next up, we're going to look through the utilities and some of the defensives, etc., that we have available to us as a Death Knight in the War Within. Now, I'm not going to show you every single one that you have in your spellbook or that you can get in the Death Knight talent tree. There are quite a lot. However, if you're a beginner or not a beginner, these are the important ones that I think you should know about. And the other ones that I'm not talking about, do have a look through your spellbook in your spare time, but they're going to be a lot more kind of niche ones. So starting off, we've got up here Path of Frost. This basically for 10 minutes means that you can walk on water. It will freeze the water beneath your feet and you can walk on water. Now, in raids, it generally probably isn't really used much. It can be sometimes. In Mythic Plus, there's certain situations where this can actually be really, really useful and, in certain PvP battlegrounds and things like that. So it is actually a really good ability to know about. Then we have, where's the target dummies? Then we have here Chains of Ice. And you can see here I've put Chains of Ice around them. Literally, this is going to shackle your enemy and one nearby target. Okay, so it's not like an area of effect. It's only one nearby target. And this is going to cost you 1 rune here. With Frozen Chains, it's going to reduce the movement speed by 70% for 8 seconds. A massive slow. Then we have Mind Freeze. On a 15-second cooldown, this is quite simply your interrupt, otherwise known as a kick. This is going to interrupt your enemy's spellcasting. Then we have Death Pact. Create a Death Pact that heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but absorbs incoming health or healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. So it's going to actually give you a massive amount of healing, but then it's going to actually absorb some incoming healing. But overall, you are going to heal more. So this is a defensive cooldown that we can use. We then have here Raise Ally. So although Death Knights can't usually just resurrect people, they can actually have a battle res. What does this mean? Well, it means you can resurrect somebody in combat, and this is how you do it. It is on a long cooldown, however. We then have Icebound Fortitude. Your blood freezes, granting immunity to all stun effects and reduces all damage taken by 30%. Anti-Magic Zone. This is a really cool one, as you can see here. Places an anti-magic zone that reduces spell damage taken by your party and raid members by 20%. And it will last for 8 seconds or until it has absorbed a certain amount of damage. And then lastly, we have Lichborn. Draw upon unholy enemy energy to become undead for 12 seconds. You can see you've got the little icon above your head when this is happening. It's going to increase your leech by 6%, reduce damage taken, and making you immune to charm and fear effects. So leech, which will actually appear up here on your stats, and this is obviously where you leech back health from your enemy when you deal damage to them. And this is actually going to be like a tertiary stat, whereas, you know, strength is your primary stat. These are your secondary stats, and I would sort of say leech, avoidance, and speed, which you can sometimes get on gear if you're lucky, or you can get them things from like Lichborn. These are your tertiary stats. And these really are the only main utilities that I think you need to know about as a Death Knight in, you know, Season 1, 11.0 of The War Within. Like I said, do go through your spellbook, etc. You know, there's things like Death Grip, and there's, you know, Control Undead and other things like that could be useful in more niche situations. But these ones I've shown you, like I said, are the core ones or the important ones that I think you should know about. Now for the exciting bit, which is, of course, the actual rotation we're going to be playing as a Blood Death Knight in The War Within. So for the hero talents, which are obviously the new hot thing introduced in The War Within, we are going to be going with Deathbringer. And one of the main abilities we get with this is Reaper's Mark, which I'll be showing you in the rotation. Apart from that, we're not really getting any active abilities, and I'll be going through these in detail shortly. So what are we going to do when we first actually go into combat? Well, we're going to use Death and Decay, Death's Caress, and then a few cooldowns, and then we're going to proceed with this normal rotation here. And this will be applicable for both raiding and single target, and M+, and AoE. It's pretty much the same. The builds are incredibly similar for Blood Death Knight. So let's say we're going into combat. We're going to place our Death and Decay. You can see here, this makes this mark on the ground, corrupts the target ground, causing shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets in the area. While you remain within the area, your Heart Strike will hit up to 3 additional targets. And that is this spell here. Then we have Death's Caress. Reach out with necrotic tendrils, dealing shadow damage and applying blood plague to your target. And it generates 2 bone shield charges. Bone shield is something we're going to be using a lot. Armor is increased and haste is increased. And that is going to be something we're stacking. We're going to want lots of stacks of bone shield. Then we're going to use our Abomination Limb, where you basically sprout an additional limb, dealing shadow damage to all nearby enemies. And the enemies are pulled into you as well, into your location. And then lastly, we're going to use Dancing Rune Weapon. Summons a rune weapon for 14 seconds that mirrors your melee attacks and bolsters your defensives. While active, you gain 35% parry chance. And you're pretty much going to use these cooldowns on cooldown outside of when we go into combat. After that, we're then going to go in with Reaper's Mark and immediately use Marrow Rend afterwards. Reaper's Mark is what we get from our hero talents. Viciously slice into the soul of your enemy, dealing damage and applying the Reaper's Mark. Every time you deal shadow or frost damage, you add a stack of that and eventually it's going to explode, etc. Now, I'm going to go through that in more detail in the hero talents. Straight after that, you're going to want to use your Marrow Rend, smash the target, dealing physical damage and generating 3 charges of Bone Shield. So what exactly is Bone Shield? It surrounds you with a barrier of whirling bones. You can actually see them here on my character. Increasing your armor massively, each melee attack against you consumes a charge, and that will last 30 seconds or until all charges are consumed. Now, if your dancing rune weapon is about to come off cooldown, then you can use something called Consumption here. Strikes all enemies in front of you with a hungering attack that deals physical damage and heals you for 150% of that damage. Deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets and cause your blood plague damage to occur more quickly for 6 seconds, and it will generate 2 runes as well. Then we want to make sure we're keeping up our Death and Decay. As I said, you should have put this in when you go into combat. You'll notice we get this buff here. Again, Heart Strike will hit up to 5 targets. And we want to make sure that our Death and Decay is down as much as possible at all times and we are standing in it. There is this talent here that is very specific about standing in your Death and Decay. You gain 5% haste while you are standing in it. And that's another reason why you always want to have it down and make sure that you personally are in it, not just your enemies. Then we have Tombstone. Consume up to 5 Bone Shield charges. For each charge consumed, you're going to gain 6 runic power and absorb damage equal to 6% of your maximum health for 8 seconds. You can see here we do have our runic power. Some abilities will generate it, some will spend it. And then we've also got our runes here as well. These are just the 2 resources we're using as a Blood Death Knight. And we do want to make sure that we are consuming the full 5 stacks of Bone Shield when we use our Tombstone as well. If you're actually spending your runic power, as you can see here, we are completely capped on it. The best way to do that is with Death Strike here. That is our runic power spender. Focus Dark Power into a strike that deals damage and heals you for all of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds. And that's a minimum of 8.5% of your maximum health, which is obviously quite a lot. We want to keep up our blood boils as well to keep the charges on this rolling. Deals shadow damage and infects all enemies within 10 yards with Blood Plague, a shadowy disease that drains health from the target. So we want to keep up those charges of Blood Plague and keep them rolling. Another reason for that is hemostasis. Each enemy hit by Blood Boil increases the damage and healing done of your next Death Strike, and that can stack up to 5 times, and that is the ability I just mentioned. So when we're using Blood Boil and keeping those charges up, it's also going to empower our Death Strike as well. And then lastly, if I've spoken about using Death Strike as a kind of a way to spend all of our runic power, but how are we going to use our runes? Well, that's going to be with Heart Strike. Instantly strike the target and another nearby enemy, causing physical damage and reducing enemies' movement speed, plus 2 runic power per additional enemy struck. Another talent I just want to make you aware of is Insatiable Blade. Dancing Rune Weapon generates 5 Bone Shield charges. And when a charge of Bone Shield is consumed, the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon is reduced by 5 seconds. Now, remember that I said Tombstone is actually going to consume up to 5 Bone Shield charges. That will also affect the cooldown on your Dancing Rune Weapon. So make sure to maximize, again, the 5 charges we're consuming to get the full effect of the cooldown reduction on your Dancing Rune Weapon for that one. We have got a few other cooldowns as well. We've got Bone Storm here. Consume up to 5 Bone Shield charges to create a whirl of bone and gore that batters all nearby enemies, dealing shadow damage and healing you for 2% of your maximum health every time it deals damage. Deals reduced damage. Lasts 2 seconds per Bone Shield charge spent and rapidly generates a Bone Shield every 1 second. And also Vampiric Blood, where basically you increase your maximum health by 30% and increase all healing and all absorbs as well. Lastly, we have a few utilities. Dark Command, which is your taunt as a tank. Death Grip, which pulls in your enemy. And Raise Dead. Raise a ghoul to fight by your side. It's on a 1.5 minute cooldown, but lasts an entire minute. So I would just pretty much use this one on cooldown as well. And that is pretty much the main rotation we're going to be using as a Blood Death Knight. This is the Mythic Plus build that I'm showing you here. The raid build is basically identical, like literally, and I will put both links in the description for you as the rotations are exactly the same for both of them. So for this build of Blood Death Knight, we are going with the Deathbringer hero talents. And honestly, I find them a bit lackluster, but here we are. So we're going to start off with Reaper's Mark. This is a new ability we get, obviously. 2 runes, 45-second cooldown, viciously slice into the soul of your enemy, dealing Shadow Frost damage and applying Reaper's Mark. Each time you deal Shadow or Frost damage, you add a stack of Reaper's Mark. And after 12 seconds, or when the enemy reaches 40 stacks, it's going to explode, dealing more damage per stack. Reaper's Mark travels to an unmarked enemy nearby if the target dies, or explodes below 35% health when there are no enemies to travel to. And that can only happen every 3 minutes in regards to the explosions. You don't have to keep putting it on like new enemies. Okay, that's cool. Wave of Souls, Reaper's Mark. Okay, these get quite in depth. I do just want to say, like, if you are new to WoW or you're a beginner in this spec, like, don't worry too much about like learning the intricacies of the hero talents. It's already all involved in the rotation I have shown you, and this is more just looking at the why and the kind of the, you know, why we're doing what we're doing, and hero talents being the new thing. I did want to go into a bit more detail for you so that you can at least try and understand. Reaper's Mark sends forth bursts of Shadowfrost energy and back, dealing damage both ways to all enemies caught in its path. Wave of Souls critical strikes cause enemies to take increased Shadowfrost damage for 15 seconds, stacking twice, and it's always a critical strike on its way back. Then we have Soul Rupture. When Reaper's Mark explodes, it deals some of the damage dealt to nearby enemies as well. Enemies hit by this effect deal reduced damage to you. We've got another one here. I'm going for Painful Death. Reaper's Mark deals increased damage, and Exterminate empowers an additional Marrow End, but now reduces its cost by 1 rune. And additionally, Exterminate now has a 30% chance to also apply Reaper's Mark. So more chances to get Reaper's Mark up. On the middle, we have Blood Fever, where your Blood Plague has a chance to deal more damage as Shadowfrost. Grim Reaper, Reaper's Mark Explosion deals up to 30% increased damage based on the target's missing health, and applies Soul Reaper to targets below 35% health. Now, I love this because it is automatically applying Soul Reaper, and we don't have to do it, which is lovely. Dark Talons, Marrow Rend, and Heartstrike have a 25% chance to increase the maximum stacks of an active Icy Talons up to twice. While Icy Talons is active, your runic power spending abilities also count as Shadowfrost damage. I don't know if I showed you Icy Talons. I haven't put a full talent tree at this when I filmed this bit, but your runic power spending abilities increase your melee attack speed, and that stacks up to 3 times. That is your Icy Talons, if you've forgotten. Then we have Bind in Darkness. Shadowfrost damage applies 2 stacks of Reaper's Mark and 4 stacks when it's a critical strike. Additionally, Blood Boil will now do Shadowfrost damage. So a lot of our attacks are now doing Shadowfrost, evidently. Pact of Deathbringer. When you suffer a damaging, and I like it because it's passive, when you suffer a damaging effect equal to 25% of your maximum health, you instantly cast Death Pact at 50% effectiveness. And that can only happen every 2 minutes. When Reaper's Mark explodes, the cooldown of this effect and Death Pact are reduced. And I think for survivability, this is fantastic. Lastly, I've chosen Death's Messenger, reducing the cooldowns of Lichborn and Raise Dead by 30 seconds, but you can also go into Expelling Shield. When an enemy deals direct damage to your anti-magic shell, their cast speed is reduced. Depending on what you're using and, you know, the niche or the nuances of the fight you're in, I would say depend on what you're taking. Go with Death's Messenger if you're not sure. Lastly, we've got Exterminate. After your Reaper's Mark explodes, your next Marrow Rend doesn't cost any runes and summons 2 scythes to strike your enemies, which is actually really, really cool. The first scythe strikes your target for Shadowfrost damage and has a chance to apply Reaper's Mark. So again, it's getting that Reaper's Mark out even more. And the second scythe is going to strike all enemies around your target for damage as well. So it's helping you hit more enemies, which, you know, is always nice as a tank. And we're able to spread more Reaper's Marks around with the scythes as well. It's giving like a very Grim Reaper kind of fantasy, which I do like. And that is a Deathbringer hero talent that we are obviously going with in this build. For the consumables and enchants, etc., that we're going to be using, the first thing first is that we can now get Nerubian Gem Weavers. This is how we're going to get extra slots on our gear from the weekly vault, and you can put that on your head, wrist, and belt. On the cloak, we're going to put Chant of Winged Grace, giving avoidance and reducing fall damage. On the chest, it's Crystalline Radiance, giving primary stat. On the wrist, it's Armored Avoidance, great for tanking. Stormbound Armor Kit, giving primary stat on your legs. Defender's March on the boots. I would go for versatility on your rings, depending what you need more as a secondary stat, especially if you're simming, could change this. But I do always like in tanking, just getting a bit of extra versatility to increase damage done and also reduce damage taken. I think you can never go wrong with that. And for the weapon, whether you are a tank with a two-hander or dual-wielding tanks, I do think Authority of the Depths is always going to be the best weapon enchant for you in Season 1 of The War Within. What this does is, when you're doing damage, it will sometimes do big shadow damage to your enemy, and that can stack 3 times. For the actual consumables you're going to be using, generally, again, I would go for the Tempered Versatility Flask, again, giving you a good all-round. Feasts are fantastic, of course, for primary stat. Tempered potions basically will give you massive increases to your secondary stats that you don't get from your flask. So everything but versatility. Algari healing potions, and then whetstones. There's 2 different ones depending on obviously what tank you are. If you're using sword, axes, polearms, maces, staffs, and fist weapons, then you can use, there's 2 different ones to choose from there. Crystallized augment runes will give you primary stat. And finally, on your on your sockets, you're going to go with the Culminating Blasphemite. It's going to increase primary stat and give you more crit effect depending on how many different coloured gems you're using, like sapphires, onyxes, emeralds, and rubies. You want 1 of each colour at least to get the full effect from the epic gem. Thank you so much for watching this guide. I hope it was really useful for you in The War Within Season 1, whether it was for Mythic Plus or raiding. If you do have any questions, I'll be happy to help. My Patreon is in the description below, and that is where you can find my LVUI profiles, which I'll show you in a second. And also, I'm putting together a huge macro list for every single spec that's going to be really useful for you in The War Within as well. I am doing all classes and specs for The War Within, so if you are new to the channel, then please do click this playlist here to check out what else I have, which is all of them. There will also be PvP guides on this channel as well for War Within Season 1, so make sure to look out for that. This here is the UI that I was referring to. As you can see, we've got target frames, etc., left and right, and raid frames go in the middle here, and then weak auras in the middle with an action bar down here. Chat is behind where my camera is. Minimap and details, etc., are here on the right. All of the plater profiles, the voodoo, the LVUI, etc., details profile has all been made by me. And again, you can get this on my Patreon should you like it.